What's up, guys? Got something kind of unique and new in this video, and that's going to be scaling the Record of Ragnarok verse. Record of Ragnarok is a series that I've become very fond of as I've been reading it recently, and I think it's uniquely hard to scale because a lot of the feats and I guess just statements that we get are in a very limited sense, in that it all takes place in a tournament. So it's just like a one-on-one fight between two characters, and we don't see those characters really interact with other characters as much as we would need to have some definitive, I guess, power scaling from character association. And we also don't really have too many feats of them fighting outside of the tournament. So there is a good limitation as to what exactly we can say about the scaling here. But that being said, I do think that there is enough to establish at least a rough approximation of where they would stand. And that's what I want to do in this video. And for what it's worth, I'm going to be going into some spoilers for both the manga and anime. So if you haven't seen it or read it and are planning to, then I just keep that in mind, or just click off the video. So first thing I want to do is just go over some of the scaling that already exists for this series, which I do have some small level of disagreement with, which I'll explain throughout the video. Right. So for attack potency, the general consensus is small building mountain level range, and this is going to be scaled off of things like Leonidas destroying the statue of Apollo, Lubu cutting through the clouds with his Sky Eater attack, and all of this is from Versus Battle Wiki, of course. And as for speed, main speed that we have is going to be stuff like Zeus's attacks against Adam, where he was surpassing time, and we even literally had panels where it was telling us oh, this attack happened in 0.00001 seconds or whatever it is. And so it was pretty easy for people to scale off of that, and it puts Zeus pretty comfortably faster than light. But so something that's going to be important to establish is, I guess, there's some baseline assumption that a lot of these characters have some degree of variability between them, but they generally scale to be around the same level. And narratively, that makes sense because there's a lot of gods that they had to choose from on the god side in the manga, and so it would be a little weird if all of the top gods had a huge range of power to them, as opposed to them being the 12 or 13 strongest of the gods in Valhalla. Maybe not Valhalla, sorry, just the heavens, right? So of course, then there are some exceptions, right? Narratively, we're gonna know that Zeus is probably gonna be faster than pretty much every other character, aside from maybe Poseidon or Kojiro, Adam, some exceptions. But generally, he'll be much faster than most of the characters, and we know this because his speed is considered to be pretty impressive. And Thor is going to be, in terms of strength, probably even the strongest of the gods. Narratively, I think he even is said to be the strongest god. Maybe it was strongest Norse god, but either way, narratively, it feels like his strength should probably be a tier above somebody like Shiva, even in his fire dance form. So, kind of addressing one of the main problems that we're going to have is going to be, so a lot of the feats that we have that are used in the Versus Battle Wiki come from the contestants when they are human and mortal, right? So Lubu's Sky Eater attack, we see that it's able to split the clouds, which can be calculated to be a mountain level feat, but we don't really know exactly how this is going to scale after they obtain Volans. And so the problem with this is, it's stated throughout the series that a human shouldn't be able to, or I guess a human-made weapon shouldn't be able to harm any of the gods. It's just not possible, right? But that's why they have Valkyries who can turn into Volans, which are capable of injuring the gods, right? And we see this obviously throughout the series. So there's some strange, I guess, ways that we can interpret this, where we're saying, okay, so if the Volan can hurt a god but a normal weapon can't, does that mean that when the contestants have Volans, their scaling is higher than it is without the Volans, right? And generally, I'm going to say probably not. And the reason for it is throughout the fights that we've seen, it does seem like the way the Volans work is more so they're some sort of durability negation. Maybe specifically when it comes to gods, the gods can't be hurt by maybe some sort of like man-made material, but the Volans aren't man-made, right? And again, like we've seen throughout the series, like instances of the human characters being able to injure the gods without even using Volans. Like, so for example, and maybe the most notable example that comes to mind is Leonidas headbutting Apollo and drawing blood, right? Like, he's able to injure Apollo with a headbutt, despite obviously his head not being the Volant. In this case, his Volant was his shield. So it does seem that maybe it's just like a matter of like for some whatever reason, man-made objects can't harm the gods traditionally. So they need to rely on the Volans to actually, I guess, surpass that like bit of hacks from the gods. So I don't think that they can actually be upscaled much from their feats on Earth, right? I just think narratively it's also just a way for them to get like cool weapons and stuff, right? I don't think it's meant to be taken as like some sort of AP boost for them. So the first line of scaling I want to do is strength, and I'm only going to be doing strength and speed because I think those are the two most important ones anyway. So for the strength scaling, the general consensus is going to be that, you know, it's like around a mountain level at peak. But I do think that there's a few different ways and reasons that we can believe that the power in Record of Ragnarok should be greater than that. First of all, obviously the gods have some sort of like dominion over humanity and Earth as a whole, right? They're very confident that they can destroy the Earth either in like a literal sense or by like wiping out humanity, which, you know, I would assume probably means that they have some level of confidence in being able to destroy the Earth. But this one's a loose line of scaling, especially because there's so many gods. Hard to say that, you know, maybe any one of them could have extincted humanity this way, right? So again, as like a baseline, we have Lubu cutting the cloud mass, which I think the scaling and the math here is something that like all checks out to me. I looked over it; it seems like it makes sense. Pixel scaling is always a little weird. I guess I don't really understand exactly how it works, so I kind of trust people when it comes to like gauging distances and stuff. And then aside from that, everything looked good. But I do think that we can get these guys a little higher. And so, first off, another feat that happens, and so I would scale Lubu like at least relative to strength to Thor, right? He was able to fight against them, and even though Thor in the end was able to overpower him, and it was maybe even like a mid-diff fight, he was able to, you know, even strike hard enough to destroy Thor's gauntlets, which contains his power, right? And it probably scales to a lot of his feats that he's like shown narratively throughout the series. So some of the feats that we have for him in the flashback would be like, you know, fighting against the giant army. And I guess from this picture we have a giant baby looking thing that looks to be about the size of like I guess like a large building, right? So Thor was pretty like easily able to dismiss like a whole army of these guys. But again, the problem with Record of Ragnarok is a lot of these types of feats are very vague. So there isn't really like a lot I can say here other than, you know, I might even put Thor at like a multi-city block level just on account of being able to handle a bunch of building plus size monsters. But again, that's a loose line of scaling. And if you want something more concrete, I have one coming up in just a sec. So with Adamus Zeus, there's going to be, you know, a lot of statements. For example, Shiva said something to the effect of like, don't go destroying the heavens now, old man. And so this is already going to be like pretty impressive just on the baseline, but even if we don't have like a direct line of scaling for how big heaven is, because narratively I think that the story kind of seems to imply that the realms are like relative in size to each other. So what I mean is like the heavens are about as big as like the mortal realm, which is as big as the demon realm. We have like an image that kind of like demonstrates that, which then goes on to kind of produce its own problem where it's like, you know, okay, so are we considering the mortal realm just Earth, or is it like the whole universe that Earth is contained in? And then how would that scaling work? So many different mythologies too, so it's really hard to say exactly like what the world of Record of Ragnarok should look like, right? But the point is, the Record of Ragnarok world also does just contain like multiple heavens, right? We obviously have like the Greek gods, we have the Norse gods, even like Christian. I don't want to call it mythology, right? Like the Christian religion is encapsulated in there. So and of course the Indian, the Hindu religion as well, right? So again, it's crazy because we have this statement, which kind of feels like it should at some level maybe even be pushing these characters to universal levels. But the way scaling works, if we don't have like a concrete statement about the size or vastness of a realm, then we really can't say anything about it, right? And so that's fine. And so another line of scaling that we can try to approach would be some statements from Zeus, one of which was something to the effect of, it was the greatest thrill I've had ever since the Big Bang, right? Kind of, I guess, narratively implying that he was around for the Big Bang. But then, of course, we run into the problem of, is the Big Bang the creation of all things, or is it just the creation of all things in the human realm? If it's just the human realm, then maybe his like AP or durability doesn't directly scale to it. But if he did exist before it and was able to experience it and not die, then obviously that's going to be like universal levels of scaling, right? And then of course we have the demon realm. Hadron being able to destroy, I believe it was half of the demon realm. But again, if we don't know the size of the demon realm, we can probably put it at most at the size of Earth. Again, narratively, because the demon realm is said to be like as big as Earth, and the Earth is supposed to be as big as heaven. And when I say Earth, I mean like the mortal realm, right? So then I think comfortably, narratively, we should at least be able to put these guys like multi-continental level through Hadron, right? But maybe, Hadron, however it's pronounced. Maybe Hadron is, going to be like power-wise scaling higher than a lot of these characters, but probably should be scaling lower than Thor and the likes of Hades as well, and obviously lower than Buddha. And then, so there's this idea, like maybe we can also approach this from a mythological standpoint, because it does seem for the most part that all of the feats and ideas that we have from mythology are present in Record of Ragnarok. So that would also include things like Thor being able to fight Jormungandr, the world serpent, who was himself able to wrap around the whole of the earth. So if we want to account for that kind of mythology, and then obviously we're going to have like crazy feats from the likes of Buddha, or Wukong, who is now appearing in the Apocalypse spin-off manga, right? And then the scaling gets like really insane. But I think without like direct statements about like confirming the existence of said feat in the Record of Ragnarok universe, it's maybe a little cheap to use like literal mythological aspects of characters. So the other thing to note is going to be that a lot of these characters do seem like they can scale like pretty close to each other, right? Shiva seemed pretty confident he could fight Zeus, so did Ra, and then Thor is like narratively like a lot higher than a lot of these, but Poseidon seems pretty fast even in comparison to the likes of Zeus. His speed seemed impressive. So like, a lot of these characters are going to be able to scale relative to each other, but some of them of course kind of exist in a vacuum. Like, it's really not going to be easy to scale the likes of Jack the Ripper or Hercules to any of the other characters. Just because they're so isolated, we don't really have feats, and like it feels weird because Jack the Ripper is like a normal dude. So if Hercules is really matching Thor in terms of powers, then like what exactly is going on, right? So to some extent, we are going to be focusing on like the high ends, and they aren't necessarily going to scale to the lower end characters in every instance. So please be like mindful of that. So this is going to be the part of the video where I go over, I guess, my own line of scaling that I want to introduce, that kind of goes heavily off of one of the new characters that was released and shown, I guess, in the new spin-off series Apocalypse, right? So here we have the character Ra, obviously based on the Egyptian sun god Ra, and I think that, it could be very easy to just say, like, Ra should scale to the sun since he, like, narratively has the power of the sun, right? But I think that we can probably do a little better than that, and we have, like, some solid feats for this. So the way I went about this was, there's a statement from Bastet that says, he is emitting like such incredible heat that even in the stands it feels like a desert, right? So here is, I guess, the line of scaling that I used using that statement, right? So to get like an estimate for the size of the actual arena that they're fighting in Record of Ragnarok, I did just consult the internet, did some digging, and found like a rough estimate for how many total people have existed on planet Earth since the beginning of humanity, because we know that in this fight all of humanity is watching, right? So that puts us about 100 billion people, more or less, right? And so I figured, we can compare this to the size of the Colosseum and how many people it had, and try to get like some rough idea as to the size of the arena, right? And so obviously there's going to be more people than just 100 million for humanity, because there's the gods as well, and it even feels like maybe the gods fill up more stands than the humans, or like at least half. But I think just to be conservative, I'm going to use the 100 billion because we don't have like a defined number for how many gods are in the Record of Ragnarok verse, and even like how many of them are going to be present at that arena. But we do know that it's all of humanity, right? So this is going to use like a very rough line of scaling where it doesn't even, it's very oversimplified, okay, is the way I would describe it. So what I said was, we have the 100 billion people that have to be in the stadium, and we also have 100,000 participants who are going to be watching at like the Colosseum in Rome, right? So 100 billion divided by 100,000 gives us a size difference of 1 million. So the way I guess interpreted this is I'm going to say that the Colosseum in Record of Ragnarok has to be about 1 million times bigger than the Colosseum that we have in Rome, right? Now this is like a very hacky way to do it. There's obviously like a lot more to it. It's not like a simple matter of like, oh, I can multiply, or I could divide 100 billion by 100,000. That should give me how much I have to increase it, right? Like it's more complicated than that, but I think for like a rough estimate, it's going to be sufficient, right? So using the size of the Colosseum in Rome, which is 24,000 square meters, and that multiplier of 1 million, we can estimate that the size of the arena in Record of Ragnarok has to be about 24 billion square meters. And then for reference, the square meterage of North America is around that number as well, right? So using this, we can also find the distance that the heat would have to travel to reach the humans on the far ends, right? By using the formula for the area of a circle, pi r squared, right? So I set, that 24 billion number equal to pi r squared, solved for r, and got about 87,000 meters, which feels like a very small number, but I guess when you take into account that, the formula does use like a square, it makes more sense, right? So now we have the distance that has to travel. So the next part of it is going to be analyzing, I guess, how exactly heat travels. And so for this, like the transfer rate, or not transfer rate, but like the apparent heat that you can feel off of like a heat source from a given distance isn't a very easy calculation to make, right? So again, I kind of did like a hacky, like rough approximation using something called the square law, which basically says that for like electromagnetic radiation, the amount of intensity that is felt at a certain distance is inversely proportional to the distance squared, right? So essentially what that means is like, for every X meters you are away from the heat source, the heat will like dissipate by a factor of X squared, right? So heat generally kind of reflects this property, but obviously there's like a lot more complication to it, especially when you take into account like, even just like air, right? And the amount of energy that it would require to, I guess, shift like some set amount of air to a certain temperature. Like it's a complicated calculation. This is like very grossly oversimplified. Somebody's watching this and they care enough and they want to, they can, I guess, try to show me like a more efficient or like mathematically scrupulous way to do it. But this is going to be like more or less all that I have, right? And so I used about 100 degrees Fahrenheit for the heat. I guess like an average heat for like a desert, right? Because again, they all say in the stands that it feels like a desert. So in order to get that like level of heat that far of a distance, we use that inverse square law. In applying it, we get that we have to have like a temperature being emitted from Ra, or like Ra would have to have like a temperature of 764 billion degrees Fahrenheit, which is gonna be like ridiculously hotter than the sun. And so you may hear this and think like, okay, wait, like something here isn't adding up, right? Because the temperature that Ra is emitting is hotter than even like the center of the sun, and yet the sun is able to like keep the Earth's average temperature like at a livable like 70 degree Fahrenheit range, even though it's so far away, like many times further away than 87,000 million meters rather, right? But the reason I think that there's like a bit of a, how do you say, like the reason that almost appears to be a contradiction is because there's like a slight misunderstanding about how exactly the sun warms us, right? It's not like we're feeling, in a sense, the direct heat of the sun, right? It's not like we're feeling the heat that's being emitted from the sun in a traditional sense. It's more so the light from the sun is able to, generate heat, like because when light hits an object, it creates heat on that object, right? So that's why on a cloudy day it's going to be colder than it would be on a sunny day. That's why when the Earth is, or when you're on like the non-sun facing side of the Earth, at nighttime it's colder, right? So this isn't actually a contradiction. It's just something I want to point out because I think that it's a very easy way to misinterpret it, and I guess I want to get ahead of the criticism of this line of scaling, right? But again, I admit that it's hacky, right? But at this like level of power, we can say that Raw should even be like multiple times stronger, or just like have more energy than the sun itself, right? Just on account of being able to generate heat that's like way, way hotter than the sun, right? And hotter than a lot of like stars in the galaxy as well, right? So that's the line of scaling I have for Raw, and I think that can kind of easily upgrade it from being like a continental or even like city block level verse to one that's more universal, or if not universal, at least like solar system level, and if not solar system level, at least star level, right? And that's one line of scaling for it. And so now to move on to the speed, and I apologize if that was like a very, I guess, complex line of calculation for the strength. I can admit that it's a little hard to even like talk through a calculation live on a video, but hopefully that made sense and you guys are able to follow that. If not, it's all on that slide, so you can just pause and like look through it, right? So for the speed feats, it's a little more solid. There's a lot more that we can say about speed because a lot more of it is just more straight up stated, especially in the fight with Zeus, right? Where we know that his attack, I guess like his punch before he hits his divine axe, goes at 0.00000001 seconds, right? It is the amount of time it takes him to actually complete that attack, right? And then, of course, later on we have statements like Zeus was able to surpass time, going to be, a pretty, I guess, easy indicator that Record of Ragnarok at its absolute peak should be like faster than light, right? And so here is an interesting, I guess, phenomenon that is going to be something that's worth addressing. And it's a line of scaling that can get Poseidon to some pretty ludicrously high levels of speed. And Poseidon, of course, is going to be, I think, among the fastest characters in Record of Ragnarok, second maybe only to Zeus. I wouldn't even say Kojiro would be faster than him, even though Kojiro was able to beat him. It wasn't like speed that he was using to register his attacks, right? It was more so his scan ability. So for the reason that we might be able to scale Poseidon higher than at least like non-Adamus form Zeus is that Ares was bragging about how he, as the god of war, was able to perceive and like follow the attacks of Zeus when he was doing his like divine axe attack and such, which was that like 0.0000001 second attack, right? And yet when he was observing the fight between Poseidon and Kojiro, he did acknowledge that Poseidon was creating after images, right? And so the way an after image works is really like an object just has to move at a speed that's fast enough that the motion won't be captured. Typically, you might even use after image in terms of like a camera, right? So it depends on like the frame rate of the camera, and so we can actually use the ability of Ares to perceive the divine axe attack to get like a rough estimate as to what his like FPS would be like for his eyes, if that makes sense, right? So in the amount of time it takes to go from so essentially Poseidon has to move faster than Ares would be able to perceive, and also has to move like a meaningful distance that by the time Ares essentially like gets his next frame, Poseidon would have already jumped like at least a few meters, right? So using that and approximating the size of the dome to have like about a diameter of a football field, which I think is like reasonable because it does seem like it's a pretty big arena, we can get the surface area of the dome that Poseidon created, which I got to be about 19,000 meters squared. Again, all the calculations are on the screen, right? So then using like the average surface area of an adult man for like Poseidon's surface area, we get like a rough approximation that he would have had to have about like 10,000 after images to create a dome that looks like that. And that might even be like a conservative number, right? But if we are using that 10,000 after image like figure, we're using that 100,000 FPS speed, I guess like camera speed, for lack of a better term, for Ares' ability to perceive the fight, and we assume that like Poseidon has to move like at least 2-ish meters between, I guess like different quote unquote frames in order for there to be like a perceivable difference in his location to somebody like Ares, right? We get out a speed of about 2 times 10 to the 12th meters per second, which is comfortably faster than light, and by like versus battle wiki standards, faster than light to the degree that we can call it, MFTL, like massively faster than light, right? And so this is actually going to be a bit of an upscale from what the versus wiki has for a feat like this. And I think that I didn't really understand the line of scaling that the person who did the Poseidon feat on versus wiki was using. I don't think he was really taking into account the number of, because I don't think he was actually going off of the after images. I think he just scaled the size of the dome and just like assumed that Poseidon would have to travel around it, and then also used the feat from Ares to get that a little higher. But I do think that this line of scaling is pretty comfortable, and I think that massively faster than light also narratively feels like it makes sense considering Poseidon's considered fast even next to a character like Zeus, who is able to fight against Kronos, who's literally has dominion over time. So really, time shouldn't really be like a huge constraint on some of these top tier characters. But maybe FTL is more like reasonable and well accepted in the community. Personally, I think you can get it to MFTL, right? So that's kind of it for the scaling, right? I have from the AP, I get around like star solar system level, depending on how you want to interpret that, based on Ra's ability to affect the whole of the arena. And then for speed, massively faster than light at the high tier with a character like Poseidon, right? And again, characters are going to be kind of hard to scale off of each other based on that because, we don't have like a definitive gauge for how much faster Poseidon would be than a character like Shiva, how much stronger Tanemon would be than a character like, Jack the Ripper, right? So, again, this is like a silly video, and I don't really know how many people are actually into Record of Ragnarok as a whole. So, if you enjoyed this video and you liked the line of scaling that I provided and it wasn't confusing, let me know. If it was confusing and you hated it, please also let me know. If you're not really a fan of Record of Ragnarok and this isn't reaching you as a target audience, but you still decided to watch this video, I guess you could drop that. But if you are interested in Record of Ragnarok and want more videos about it in the future, please let me know. I think this one, with this video, I feel like I'm very much entering uncharted territory, and I don't really know exactly how well this is going to be received. So any sort of input, feedback is going to be nice and helpful, and I would appreciate it. Hope you guys all have a fabulous day, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.